Hi everyone, welcome to Thursday's session of talking about all things workplace relations and COVID-19. You see me in my fancy sweatshirt today, living Employshaw's brand. Just a slight plug for that, you can go onto employshawswag.com.au if you are such a keen client that you would like to wear our kit around your business proudly. So anyway, that's please don't feel obliged to do that. But if you do, you might find a smile in looking at the website and some of the stuff that's on there. I'm going to keep to the structure that we've developed over time. Again, with that mantra that I'm hoping to get us all to follow, or it might be useful to all of us at least, to be clear, consistent, and concise in our communication. So if I turn up at midday every day and do this session, but I'm also clear, consistent and concise in what I do. Hopefully that's something that will serve as a bit of inspiration as to how you might manage in your workplace as well. To that degree, I'm going to kick off with a pivot story, which will segue into starting to talk about safety at work and your planning around that. Then I just want to briefly cover off the unemployment figures that have come out just this morning from the Aussie Bureau of Statistics. I think the PM's actually speaking on them now, so with the risk of sending the audience in the wrong direction, I'm going to compete with him for airtime again. And then we're going to finally do our Q&A session. So the pivot story today is an odd one in the sense that, first of all, I'm not going to name the client for reasons that will become apparent in a moment, but they do have the dubious honour of being the first person that I know who has been diagnosed with COVID-19 and the first person that we've actually heard of in the business. So a pretty rare situation, frankly, in the context of our society at large. And unfortunately for them, they are a business owner who was just getting back to work with approximately 5 employees, and they've been diagnosed as having COVID, and that's sent shockwaves through their workplace. And they've had to pivot, and they've had to, having got back to a certain stage of reopening, they've had to change that view, and they're having to deal with all the communication challenges of working through fear and concern with their staff and so forth. What's really interesting about it as a pivot story is that how difficult that is for a business to work out. And I've sort of sat down this morning and gone through online what you would be doing as a business owner if that situation happened to you. Say, what on earth are my obligations? Do I need to tell everyone about the fact that I have been diagnosed with COVID-19? I know there's an issue around privacy with that, for example. If I do, how are people going to react? How do I communicate with them? What are my obligations in terms of other people getting tested and or shutting down my workplace? Is that a required or a pragmatic or necessary solution to the situation? How long does that go on for? Do I have to pay people during that? Are they on pandemic leave? All of these questions start to swirl around. Now, I have to say that you can't complain for lack of information out there about these things, but it is pretty hard to get quite definitive answers. So one of the things that comes out of that is, am I required to shut down my workplace? And there isn't a definitive answer to that. The position generally is that there's no strict requirement for you to shut down your workplace if a worker in your workplace has COVID-19. But in practical terms, you might have to, because there may be a certain number of workers there that mean that basically there's been social contact between the carrier and every single worker, and or there may be customers coming in and there's too much risk for you to carry on operating in the hope that the other employees haven't got it. So you might need to, first of all, get them all tested. But second to that, there's varying information on what should happen once you've been tested. Do you still have to self-isolate? Does that mean all of your employees have to self-isolate? There is no cookie cutter response, which does mean this, and this is the segue into safety at work. And I had this situation, interestingly, here in our workplace. that we had as I've been discussing, a group of employees that have come back into the workplace, and one of them attended not feeling very well the other day, and he was immediately sent home and went off to be tested. Fortunately came back negative. But the fact is, you're going to be dealing with human behaviours that, whilst we might have been immersed in this, and you might have been listening to this daily for 42 days now, the reality is that everyone's got a differing degree of understanding of their obligations and a differing degree of concern for their obligations. We've all seen people fairly clearly flouting the rules, and we've seen people following them. And you'll have employees that feel differently about it. Have employees that are still very panicked about COVID-19. You'll have those that might never have got out of the denial stage because they weren't really required to. Those are difficulties that you're going to have in implementing any sort of practice or procedure in your workplace, but you do need a plan. And I reminded our team here in our crisis meeting of this to say, we've got to make sure we haven't got complacent in having the majority of our workforce for the duration of the shutdown working from home. Now we're starting to get more and more people coming in. We've got to have a very clear understanding as to what happens if someone gets diagnosed or someone is sick. What are we actually going to do? Do we want to end up reducing or doing as this particular client did, having to close their workplace premises, because that's a very dramatic step that actually in our case we probably wouldn't have to do. And the reason we wouldn't have to do it is, say for example, the employee that was showing some symptoms of being ill here the other day, I sit on a different floor to them, I'd had no contact with them. It would be an overreaction for us, and it's not required by law for us to shut down. But you need to make sure that you've got a plan in place, and to that extent, you need to make sure that your workplace ready. That's a very important point for all of you. I'm just going to pause for a moment. We've got a bit of feedback on.
Yeah, we're getting some complaints about the lack of volume, so potentially we could switch over to another stream if you want. So do you want to, if anyone, can you just ask for a shout out?
Yeah, guys, shout out if you're still struggling with the volume. We've had this for the last day or so. I'm not sure what's going on, but
yeah, just you need to just speak.
Yeah, I've got to shout at the screen apparently. So apologies if you haven't got a problem with volume and you're having me. First of all, you're so close to my face now that you can probably see every blemish, and there are quite a few. But you're also going to have me shouting in your face as well for the next hour, so I apologise. But hopefully, in the absence of technology doing its job, just good old-fashioned shouting will do. I was just talking about making sure that you've got a plan for your workplace and that you are workplace ready. Okay, now volume's good, looking better at least. If you can't hear me, bad luck. So you can't see my fancy sweatshirt anymore. There we go. No, you need to make sure you've got your plan in place, and the plan doesn't just involve doing a risk assessment. The plan necessarily, as we spoke about last week, because these are things that might affect the health and safety of your staff, you need to consult with them about it as well. But you then need to undertake a risk assessment, which might result in you making physical changes to your workplace. So the classic one in a retail environment might be putting up a perspex screen between the till and customers, for example. It might not be necessary, but there are various recommendations and various steps that you might be able to reasonably take. Basically, the test for a lot of these things is what is reasonably practicable for you to do. It doesn't mean that you need everyone walking around in hazmat suits. You need to follow the level of reasonable guidance that we're getting from the government, which sometimes will be practicable for you and sometimes it won't. But you need to consult your staff about that. You need a risk assessment to have your business understand what needs to be done. You then need to implement it. But one of the things that you do practically need as well is a system and understanding is what is going to happen in certain scenarios. What happens if a customer calls you today and says, I was in yesterday and I've been diagnosed with COVID-19. What are you actually going to do as a business? What happens if one of your employees, like we had here, presented with a level of illness? Because, like I say, you don't want to overreact at this time. You want to have a good, consistent plan that you know is well within the boundaries of the law. Because if you overreact, and I was chatting to this particular client about this overnight, that the problem is, of course, that if you overreact, you've just got back to work with all of the cost and stress and trouble that's placed on everyone. To then go backwards again, it could be both financially and otherwise damaging to your business. And you need to make sure you've got a good plan that's well communicated, so that really there are no surprises for anyone if a certain set of circumstances happens. You need to put your hand on heart and say, realistically, if I had one of these scenarios today, would I have a clear plan? Would my staff know what to do? Would they know who to contact? And some of you might have had that, but you might have been working from home or been otherwise shut down for a few weeks, and your recollection of what that plan was, and indeed the guidance as to what that plan needs to be, might have changed. So you do need to make sure that you're up to speed on those things. Make sure that you're getting workplace ready. As ever, we're promoting free resources on our website. I had a bit of feedback actually today, guys, just saying we probably need to make those a bit more available, the workplace ready resources. That they seem to, there was a mention there's still a lot of JobKeeper stuff, but not, wasn't clear where to go for the workplace ready stuff. Our clients, we've started the process of contacting you. I specifically spoke to the team doing that today to get Maruya childcare called this week to get out and see you, to get you workplace ready. We'll be talking about those things for you: consultation, risk assessment, making sure you've got your COVID disaster recovery plan in place, so that you are workplace ready. And for those people that otherwise might be interested in our assistance, you can go on to employsure.com.au/workplace ready and register your interest. For $500, we'll come out and make those assessments of your businesses. That's here and in New Zealand, by the way. We're doing it for our clients and for non-clients in New Zealand as well. So there's a bit about safety at work. For what it's worth, my insights on the unemployment figures that have just come out, I'm not greatly surprised by them. There's been an increase in unemployment from 5.2% to 6.2%, which is nothing like the dramatic increases that we've been reading about in, say, the US. But that doesn't greatly surprise me, principally for this reason. My worry is, if you bear in mind, if you look at all of Australian businesses and those that are on their business, not stuck in them, probably still down at best, crisis management, at worst, some form of denial, you guys are not in that category. You wouldn't be bothering to tune into this, frankly, if you were still down at that stage. We all have our days, but generally speaking, you guys are organised and forward thinking about what you should be doing and how you're managing risk. So to the degree that any of you feel like you might have your head stuck in the JobKeeper sand, imagine what the rest of the 800,000 businesses in Australia that are not doing this and looking at other resources to make sure that they're planning ahead. I think the brutal truth is this, is that unemployment figure just does not reflect the reality of what's going to happen come September, October, subject to JobKeeper being extended and amended, whatever else. But I think that there are a lot of people who are effectively unemployed, who are currently receiving JobKeeper as a social benefit, and it's just not appearing on unemployment figures because they're technically still engaged by their work. So I think that there's a bit of, and that was part of the purpose of the JobKeeper scheme, was to keep up that engagement. And the cynic in me says it has the benefit of keeping the narrative to the public pretty positive, which is that 6.2% is certainly not great. It's a significant increase in unemployment, but it's not as bad as the US and other countries at the moment. What is a bit odd about the figures, I don't know whether any of you are seeing this reflected at a business level, but there was a big number of people who sort of took themselves out of the market and they essentially aren't putting themselves forward as being available for employment. I don't really understand why that is. It just seems like a sort of odd consequence maybe of COVID, that people have sort of gone into some form of employment hibernation. So they're not saying they're unemployed, they're just saying they don't work. And that seems to be an odd part of what the figures are saying today. But generally speaking, pretty good news. I'm not an economist, so the actual percentage of people that might be unemployed but still sitting on JobKeeper, I don't know. I know there's, if you think about it, I think the unemployment number in Australia is sub 1 million people. There are 3+ million people on JobKeeper. So there's 3 times as many people on JobKeeper as there are who are flagged as being actually unemployed. You wouldn't need many of the people on JobKeeper to not actually have jobs at the end of September to have a big spike in unemployment when all this happens. Why do I bother telling you that? Really to remind that we've got to take our head out the JobKeeper sand. I've been invited back on to the Channel 7 today onto a show called The Daily Edition, I think at 2:15. 2:10. I'll still be waffling on at 2:15, I reckon. But, I've been invited back on to the Daily Edition to talk about JobKeeper today. And one of the things that they ask is, or they've asked me to prepare for, I should say, is that they about this idea that people, once you're on JobKeeper, you've got your job reserved. What Scott Morrison had previously called a sort of moral contract, and I've been perhaps a little bit controversially going against that grain and saying, look, there's actually not. In this context, there isn't such a thing as a moral contract. You actually have a fiduciary duty, which is a legal obligation to manage your business in the best way, in the best interest of the shareholders. That moral contract is no defence to you doing the wrong thing and just burying your head in the JobKeeper sand and saying, oh, I thought that's what Scott Morrison wanted me to do. You need to manage your costs now, and you need to be very careful that you are not just putting off to a rainy day a difficult decision or a difficult conversation. So those were the points I wanted to cover before we move on to our standard Q&A session. I should say, just before we do, Stu, there were a couple of outstanding ones yesterday that I went on and answered. So hopefully those clients or businesses have had the answers that they needed. One of them, quite interestingly, that I'll just flag, because they've asked me to talk about it on this Daily Edition thing today, was this idea about whether you can swap JobKeeper companies. And deep in the explanatory memorandum, it basically says that once you signed up with one company, that's your JobKeeper company. You can't, let's say you signed up with someone that you're only doing 3 hours a week for, just because that employer was quicker on the draw than you were, and you're saying, hang on, I'm paying them to do 16 hours a week, I could really do with a subsidy. Unfortunately, they're stuck with that JobKeeper subsidy, even if they got dismissed from that role or otherwise stopped working for them. Then what would happen is that, and it says this very expressly in the explanatory memorandum, they should then go on to Job Seeker. They can't come across to you for JobKeeper, which might be a bit frustrating for some people that, like I say, weren't quick enough on the draw, and they feel like they're the primary employer, and the person should have put them down as their JobKeeper employment. The only but for that, I suppose, would be if the employee hadn't properly signed up for JobKeeper elsewhere. So let's say, for example, they weren't a regular and systematic casual, or didn't have those 12 months that they need in that position, then you might be able to challenge that and say you shouldn't be on JobKeeper over there. You need to notify the ATO and come over here onto JobKeeper with us. So you could look at that. But anyway, that was one that was had a bit of an outstanding question mark on it yesterday. So let's see whether we can answer some questions. A couple of sound ones coming through still, but
yeah,
even closer.
Yeah, I mean, just tell Ed, I'm reading this, tell Ed that after, we have a mic on the way for him after the stream. So we'll be going with high tech next time, Ed.
Who's telling us that?
Bethany.
Bethany. Okay. Good. We're going high tech next time. It's about time we invested in it, I suppose.
Well, it's been 40 odd live streams now. So just to sum up the sense at the start of the show when we had some mic issues, Ed, this is from Kathleen. Ed, you're way closer than 1.5 meters to me now.
I know. I feel like I'm about 1.5 inches. I do. It's really amazing how big my nose looks at this angle as well. I think maybe it's just big generally, but anyway, I'm trying not to look in the little screen in the bottom right, and I'll focus on answering questions to the camera.
And also, just one final comment to kick it off from Naomi. Hi, Ed and team. I'm a current client. I had my workplace ready check with Employ Shore via Zoom this morning. Barb was brilliant, knew her stuff and helped a lot, so thank you.
Great, that's lovely feedback. Barb is brilliant. She's fantastic. She's one of our very best, I have to say. She's been with us a number of years. So I'm pleased she's doing a good job for you, Naomi.
And just one final one before we kick off into the nitty gritty. This is from Donna. Woohoo, from the Australian Sweet Company, one of your favourites, Ed. We received JobKeeper into our bank account today.
Great. Don't make a dad joke. That's sweet. There we go. Just on that, actually, just to flag for you, because some of you will be still worrying. I think actually I just saw Naomi say there that she's waiting. So I went back into the rules today. We're waiting as a company, by the way, as well. We haven't got ours yet. So the rules say it should be done by the 14th today. So hopefully there'll be a flood this afternoon. But there is a but. If you made your application or didn't comply with all the things that you needed to get done within the rules as part of that application, that clock, the 14-day clock, starts from the day that your application was made properly. So in the current circumstances, it may be that actually we're looking at a longer timeline. Remembering, of course, as well, for the first couple of fortnights, you can actually apply right until the end of May. So you're obviously not going to have been paid if you haven't made the application yet. Similarly, if you didn't make the application properly first time, the clock starts from the time, the 14-day clock starts from the time that you did.
From Clara, I have employees on JobKeeper enabled directed reduced hours. Do I need to pay their super on reduced hours or on original full-time hours?
Good question. You only do the super on the hours that they work, so on the reduced hours.
From Vicky, we have 2 staff who commenced with us on the 2nd of March. However, they were offered those permanent full-time roles late January, but had to work out and through notice periods. Is there any chance we can get them included in the JobKeeper allowance scheme, given they were contracted to start with us well before the 1st of March?
It sounds like they're prior. It's not like they started the roles for you, the particular type of roles of you, after the 1st of March, but were previously working for you, if that makes sense. So, assuming they had another employer before the 1st of March, and sadly not. The explanatory memorandum tries to explain why this is, and it says it's basically JobKeepers to cover people who were on the payroll during the good times, if you like, and therefore continue to be supported. If you only started after the 1st of March, regardless when the contract was signed, unfortunately you don't qualify. You're not eligible.
Yeah. And a nice general one from Cheryl. Hi Ed, we're a client. We have one casual who earns $375 gross per week. Do we pay her a top up to $750 or plus $750?
You pay her a top up to $750, so not that you don't. This is one of the sort of the bad behaviours that I've seen come out from some employees who are demanding that as a plus. That's not the way JobKeeper should work. I mean, you could choose to do it in that way if you're feeling particularly generous, but you're only required to do the top up to $750.
From Craig. Does an employee who is taking sick leave during this time and the employer is receiving JobKeeper use up the sick leave or JobKeeper?
You would be using the JobKeeper to pay the sick leave that they are otherwise on. So let's say, and this is quite an interesting point actually, if someone is on sick leave, let's say they've been off for the last 2 or 3 weeks and are still on sick leave, you would be using the $1,500 that you get to give them their sick leave. If their sick leave was less than the $1,500, you'd top it up to the 15. You do a JobKeeper top up in that way. Be just a flag though for people. You can't, if someone's away on sick leave at the moment, you couldn't effectively give them a JobKeeper enabled direction until they return to work, and then you consult with them and so forth. You can't take those actions while someone's away on sick or other leave.
A question and a comment from Helen. First question. One of our long-time staff has handed in her 2-week resignation when after we asked her to attend a performance management meeting. Do we have to finish her employment in 5 weeks due to her age, or can we negotiate with her to leave when her long service leave has finished in 8 weeks? After that, understanding she will gain her accruals, etc. That was the question. The comment is, this is bringing out the best in some people and such ugliness in others, which has stresses of its own.
Yeah. So that's a difficult one in a sense, but the broad answer is this: you can certainly negotiate that with the employee if that's what they want to do. If they want you to pay out some of their long service leave and extend their employment with you, and therefore you're getting JobKeeper for them during that period, that's fine. You could also pay them out in lieu of notice and pay out their other entitlements as well. If you pay someone in lieu of notice, you don't. So let's say they had a 4 or 5 week notice period and you paid them in one whack, you wouldn't get the 4 or 5 weeks of JobKeeper payments for them because they're not actually employed by you for those 4 or 5 weeks. You've paid them out, and that's when their employment ends. So you want to have a look at, first of all, the way in which it's most beneficial to you. And then I'd lay your cards on the table and talk to the employee and say, look, this is the way in which it would help us most. You've got these accrued entitlements. We can get some funding from them, the government, for them in this way. Are you happy for that to be the way we end this relationship? The baseline, though, would be that they would need to give you the notice, which sounds like it's 5 weeks. And they would need to work that notice unless you didn't require them to, and you therefore gave them a JobKeeper enabled stand down, essentially.
Okay. From Tony Ann, with a few followers on this particular one. Thank you for the great updates. We have an employee who has resigned, has worked 2 days into this week. Do we pay him a top up of only $750, which is this week, or should he be paid the fortnight top up of $1,500?
So I was just going to use a similar question. Lisa Wright's asked a similar question. A lot of people resigning. It's quite interesting, isn't it? I think the last time I'd be resigning would be now, putting myself in the job market. But there we go. The way in which it works, if you've worked for any part of a fortnight, you get the full $1,500. So you don't get a proportionate amount, whether it's a week or a day. You still get the $1,500.
And Ed, you've touched on this many times over the last few weeks, but this time from Sammy. I just want to confirm, if we were eligible in April, but in May are no longer down 30%, does this reject our claim or make us ineligible? Or do we just keep submitting our figures monthly?
So once you're in until you're told you're not. So keep submitting your figures monthly. We talked here about how the explanatory memorandum suggests that those monthly figures aren't designed to take you out of the scheme. I think it's pretty unlikely that, basically what you're going to be doing is saying to the ATO each month, these are my figures, I wasn't down 30%, but then next month I think I will be. I think it's pretty unlikely that, when there's a wash up in this, that there isn't some question mark about who should and shouldn't have got it. So if you're not, you haven't seen the 30% downturn, but you've otherwise been approved as eligible, I just have that in your back of your mind so that in case you do have to come back and pay it back one day.
Okay. From Linda, she's a client. She says, hi Ed, have you heard anything more on the JobKeeper payment changing to be more like the New Zealand model?
Hi Linda, thanks for your business. I haven't, I was just talking about the New Zealand model today actually because of our business over there. So you've got to have had a downturn in New Zealand as well, and you're getting a 12-week payment up front that you're required to use to fund the cash flow of your employees. So it's a different way of paying. I don't think it will change to do that sort of thing. Scott Morrison said that he's going to look at this and review it in June. But as I said yesterday, I don't think what he means by that is he's going to rip the rug out from people. It would have to be a pretty spectacular V-shaped economic recovery for that to happen. And I don't think realistically that's the situation that we're going to be in June. So I think what he'll be looking at is, like they did in the UK, is extending it and or giving some extended focus as to who this goes to. So it might be certain industries over and above the September cut-off date. There might, I suppose, be some clarification around the questions like, you were 30% down, you're not any longer. What does that mean for you? So this idea that once you're in till you're out, he might give some more clarification as to when you're out. But I don't think that we'll get substantive changes that would see the rug pulled out of it from under us.
And this one, apropos of the COVID app from Georgia, just regarding workplace safety. We're an accounting firm, not currently seeing face-to-face appointments. When we decide to restart the service, would we be able to only hold these if our clients provided proof of the COVID Safe app? Or would other measures be recommended, such as limiting time, social distancing requirements, etc.?
I'd recommend the other measures. That's your health and safety requirement, if you like, to follow the guidance. There's not nowhere is there a requirement that a client coming in to see you must have downloaded the app. And we've talked about it in the context of employees, but ultimately the legislation is broader than that, which says you can't, as a person, force another person to download the app, and you wouldn't want it misconstrued that you are, by implication of not seeing people unless they've done it, you're essentially forcing them, which could, it's unlikely I think you'd get any wash up from that, but it could cause a problem for you. But yeah, in the same way in a household, frankly, I can't get my wife to download, well, she's downloaded it, but I couldn't in principle force her to do it.
This from...
I can't force her to do anything, by the way. She doesn't listen to anything I say. But so it's got nothing to do with the legislation, that one.
Let that one go. This from Stu, not me.
Yep.
Client and fan of EdTV. We're an arts-based industry and we've been ignored by the government. Do you have any insight on when theatres will open? There seems to be information about sporting events, but very little info for the theatre community.
That's a really good point. Is that there are those cracks, aren't there? But the cracks only become chasms really when you look at the fact that you've got multiple states doing multiple different things. You're bound to get friction and items missed. And spot on that the arts has been largely missed from the express communications that have been given so far. In practice, what it means, in a way, it's good if you don't have the express communications, because what you're then left to do is to deal with the broader rule set. So at the moment, it's the 10-person rule in most states. WA is accelerating ahead on that, but looking at what that means as to how you might be able to do productions, remembering that the 10-person rule doesn't apply to your workforce per se. We've got more than 10 people in our workplace today, but we can only have 10 visitors, or will do once New South Wales goes to that rule. So that would be a similar rule for the arts, together with social distancing. So it may be totally uneconomically viable to put on productions with only 10 people, 10 visitors, but it may be possible to start looking at doing things. And then, of course, you may be pivoting as well with technology. So frustrating at the moment, but I think that what you'll see, that 10-person number will escalate pretty quickly. Using my standard drive to work test, the traffic's right back. I've been stuck in traffic jams all week, funnily enough, I might just allow myself a slight bitch and moan for a moment, but you're talking of communication and controlling the narrative with your workforce. I think at a political level, what we're seeing at the moment is because of this dissipation into state-based rules, and because of the confusion that's being caused by the complexity, the state government's losing control of the narrative. Fortunately, in Australia, we're pretty lucky in that our version of civil unrest is pretty mild, and it involves hanging around too long outside the cafe with your takeaway coffee. But the reality is that there is no way what I'm seeing on the street reflects what the current rule set is. And the longer it goes on with lack of clarity, the worse and worse that's going to get. And My worry, I suppose, is that you end up with a backlash from state government on that because they get annoyed that no one's listened to them, rather than a sense check from them, which is let's revert to the why of why we had the shutdown in the first place. It was to ensure the health service isn't getting overwhelmed. Now, what we all know in Australia is the health service is nowhere near overwhelmed. In fact, it's quite underwhelmed at the moment. So it only makes the provisions in the various state rules somewhat, frankly, just even more confusing. But there we go, rant over.
A tough one to answer from FDC in Armidale. If we haven't received our JobKeeper payment yet, is it possible to still receive it overnight tonight?
FDC, it is, and also ask yourself the date on which you completed your application and got all of the facets of that application done, because like I say, deep in the rules it says actually that there's a secondary date that might be relevant to you, which is 14 days after that rather than 14 days after the month.
From Caroline, hi Ed, just wondering what your thoughts are on the annual wage review. Could there be a possibility that an increase won't be awarded this year at all?
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? I suspect there's a lot of people procrastinating over that. They're just going to want to. It's such a volatile thing to do, to not give to not give any form of wage increase, which to business owners we might say would be mad to give a wage increase at this time. We pay above award, but we've done quite openly done a wage freeze for a year. What would it be sensible to the economy to push forward with a wage increase at all? There'd be economists that are far more intelligent than I am that would say that wage increases drive spending and blah blah blah. So they may feel that there's some need at least to keep up with CPI, but we'll have to see. I mean, what they definitely can't do is delay the decision. They can't say, look, not yet. Let's do it in a couple of months. There's just no scope to do that under the rules. So they're going to be forced into a decision pretty imminently. My guess that there'd be something that looks a bit like inflation, and we'll have to see.
From Wade, I have an employee who is a qualified casual, and due to him receiving the top up to $1,500, Centrelink has told him his youth allowance, along with his $550 increase, will be cut off. Is it your understanding that he should lose those entitlements altogether because I'm required to pay him the $1,500?
So it's good that you're worried about him, but the truth is it's his problem. He needs to work out which way he's better off, either by getting those Centrelink payments or by getting JobKeeper from you. He doesn't have to get JobKeeper from you. He didn't need to sign the nomination form, and he can withdraw from it as well if that's a better position for him to get those Centrelink payments. And I've seen various versions of that where people have said, you know what, JobKeeper's not good for me because it takes me up too high and starts impacting my other income.
Good one on social distancing in vehicles. This one from Megan. Just wondering if you would have any clarification with the lifting of restrictions. That is, if you can have workers in a truck and it seats 3 across, is that allowed, or would it only be allowed 2 in a truck?
So any really avid watchers of this will remember that we were toying with these questions early on, and it's really interesting because they're now coming back into our mindset, whereas for a while they perhaps weren't. The practical reality of this is that you just need to be practical. Your workplace safety obligations are that you are required to provide a safe working environment for your employees, and you have to be reasonably practical about that. So do they need to do that to undertake the job? Is there a way in which they could drive in 2 vehicles? Those sorts of questions you've got to ask yourself. But if it all boils down to the fact that this is the only way in which the work can get done, then yes, try and minimize contact between them, provide them with hand sanitizer before they get in, those sorts of things that you could do on top of that. But there's no strict rule that says they cannot do that because of social distancing.
From Jeannie, hi Ed, can you terminate a paid parental leave employee due to COVID-19? The employee is due to return in July. I am laying off other staff.
You can certainly consult with them. when you say due to COVID-19, I appreciate you having to be pithy on Facebook to ask the question, but you can certainly consult with them, and you should, because their workplace changes and they should be included in any consultation process. And if their role is redundant, then you can move ahead in that way, subject to consultation and so on. But there's certainly a risk there in doing it, and I tend to be pretty averse to doing anything that looks like it might be connected to the absence rather than the loss of role.
Another one to do with resignations, but asked slightly differently, this time from Lisa. If an employee resigns within the JobKeeper fortnight, do we still pay the whole fortnight under JobKeeper, or just that portion that they worked?
The whole. Yeah, so any work done in any JobKeeper fortnight, they get the whole. You get the whole as well. So no, it's not, you're not going to be out of pocket, but they have to get the 1,500. Okay. So it's interesting, isn't it? There's definitely a change in the type of questions here. That those that are JobKeeper related, and now I'm pleased because they're head out of sand questions. Those two questions just now are very much head out of sand. I'm planning. I'm thinking. I'm not stuck in the idea that I've got to just take JobKeeper every month, even though I've got a group of people not doing any work. You're starting to think about how to organise your workforce better.
Yep. And on that note, straight back into JobKeeper. It's from Sarah. Hi Ed, I'm one of your clients in Perth. Just to clarify that if I take a new employee now, will I not be eligible for JobKeeper for that employee?
Yeah, yes, that's right, Sarah. Thank you for your business as well, but yeah, you won't be. There's the only way that you could possibly be eligible is if that was someone you were rehiring that did work for you on the 1st of March, but for some reason stopped, and you're now rehiring them.
From Marie, she's a client. There is a very grey area with regards long service leave and the top up to normal hours. What's your interpretation, please?
You can't, so someone is, and I presume the question is, you've got someone that is going to take long service leave, and that would be by agreement, then you can use JobKeeper to top up, to pay that long service leave, and if necessary, you've got to make sure it's topped up to 1,500. But you can't force someone to take long service leave is my position on that.
Okay. And a good nuts and bolts questions from Samantha. Hey crew, I've been saved by your daily show. When an employee is on JobKeeper and they have sick days, do we pay the sick leave and then the difference to $750 in JobKeeper?
Yes. So the presumption there is the employee on sick leave is getting less than the $750 or $1,500. So regardless of the fact they're sick, they need to get the $1,500.
Okay.
But their sick leave will be reduced because they're on sick leave, not just plain old JobKeeper stand down. You would be essentially using JobKeeper to pay down their sick leave entitlement.
From Michael, we have an employee on less than JobKeeper and wants to take time off without pay. How do we set up their pay in this situation?
So they're asking for leave without pay.
Yep.
You would agree that, get that in writing. A reason it's important is that that's quite different to a JobKeeper stand down. You don't accrue your entitlements in the same way when you're on leave without pay. Then what you would do is during the leave without pay period, you would just pay them the $1,500 every fortnight. As I understand it, the STP systems have now got a line in them where you would essentially a JobKeeper label that you can say that this is $1,500 being paid as JobKeeper, not as wages.
From Karen, our employee would like to take a week's leave. He is a casual and has time in lieu available. Should I pay him JobKeeper only, or should I be paying him time in lieu?
Could you say that one again, Stu? Sorry.
Sure. Our employee would like to take a week's leave.
Yep.
He's a casual and has time in lieu available. Should I pay him the JobKeeper only, or should I be paying him time in lieu?
So if he's got time in lieu, you'd pay that. If it's over and above the JobKeeper, you can, he can be paid that basically.
From Philomena, hi Ed, can you help me with this query? I have a casual employee paid weekly. If the employee works more than $750 gross on week 1 of the fortnight, is it possible for that employee to work less on week 2 to keep the fortnightly hours consistent with the $1,500 per fortnight? Or do I pay total amount worked each week, which will be over 1,500 gross?
I'm going to need that one again as well.
Yeah,
So
me
I'm just
too.
thinking about the time off in lieu for the casual. That seems like a bit of an odd one for me. We'll come back to you on that.
Okay. From Philomena.
Yep.
Can you help me with this query? I have a casual employee paid weekly. If the employee works more than 750 gross on week 1 of the fortnight, is it possible for that employee to work less on week 2 to keep the fortnightly hours consistent with the $1,500 per fortnight? Or do I pay total amount worked each week, which will be over $1,500 gross?
It depends what you need, really. So it's a regular and systematic casual by the sounds of it. So there'll be some level of hours which are regular and systematic, which you'll end up with a dispute if you start removing hours from them that they were otherwise regularly doing. But if you don't need them to do more than the $1,500, then they can do that. The problem's where people try and get people to do more than they would otherwise do. But it sounds like you want to do less, which you're entitled to do. Even if you ended up having to do it by a JobKeeper enabled stand down.
This one from Kelly. If someone who is eligible for JobKeeper doesn't pass their probation period and is stood down, do you continue to pay JobKeeper?
Someone has
passed their probation,
yeah,
and then have been stood down. Do you continue to pay JobKeeper?
Yes, so they stood down as if they've been stood down under a JobKeeper enabled direction. They're an employee, they've passed probation, so yes, you would pay JobKeeper.
Doesn't pass their probation.
Doesn't pass. Okay, so sorry, you've then essentially you're dismissing them, and you would pay JobKeeper for any fortnight up to which their effective termination date takes place, but you wouldn't pay them after that. See, our client Marie is just on the long service leave. She says that quite bluntly, quite fairly, I didn't answer her question. So I'm going to try again. She says it's a very grey area of long service leave. An employee being able to use top up to normal hours, e.g. work to plus. Look, an employee, you can agree that with your employee. If they've got long service leave available, they're able to access it. I don't have a problem with them using it to top up, and you would use the $1,500 to pay some or all of the total 5 days that they're working on or taking long service leave.
And in line with our 45-minute mantra, can we end with a comment?
Sure.
This one from West Coast Back and Body Centre and Hall's Head Chiropractic down Mandurah Way, I'm assuming in Western Australia.
Yep.
A client, I just wanted to say thank you for all the advice that you've offered over this time. I can't always make the live sessions, but I always jump on the website and watch the day's video on there. So thanks, Ed, and all the Employ Shore team.
Thank you very much. And Mandurah, that's great. I'd love to get down to that part of the world, I have to say. I've got a lot of visits lined up for after this. So drive-through cinemas. It sounds like a back and body. I could probably get some remedial massage as well, or something like that. So there's a lot of trips coming up. Good. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Marie, if I haven't got to, if that still wasn't straight enough, give me a shout and we'll answer your question. But otherwise, I'll see you on Friday. Cheers.